With unspoken agreement, the two men got out of the car and reached in unison for the heavy quilted jackets they'd thrown on the back seat. It was 5 o'clock in the morning in late January, and neither needed a thermometer to know the temperature was below 0. They walked swiftly and with purpose, unconsciously emulating the way they travelled the hospital corridors. "Real-life doctors don't run the way they do in those TV shows," Adam had once told his wife, who was addicted to medical dramas. "And after 20 years as a physician, I've never once said stat," he added for good measure. "It's bound to be just a piece of rubbish," Phil declared, tugging to free one foot from the greedy sand. "If it is, you owe me a new pair of trainers," Adam said, releasing his own foot with a noisy squelch. In fact, he never got to finish his sentence, because that was the moment when he saw the woman's foot. Neither of them could remember crossing the final 20 metres that separated them from the casualty, but they did so at a run. Phil had reached for his phone and was swearing softly at the absence of signal, while Adam dropped to his knees beside the unconscious woman. She was lying on the mudflats, dressed in a thin cotton nightgown, one naked leg exposed to the elements, the other lost beneath the surface of the mud. "Fuck, no reception," Phil said, abandoning his mobile and hurrying to join Adam, who was already shaking his head as he sought for a pulse at the base of the woman's long, slender neck. With slick choreography, Phil bent his ear to the woman's blue-tinged lips. No breath warmed his cheek. Her chest didn't rise or fall. He reached for her hand, slapping the back of it as though searching for a vein. "Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?" he shouted. But the woman was unresponsive. "We need firmer ground for CPR," Adam said, his teeth chattering from the cold. There was probably an efficient technique to extract someone from the enveloping mud, but neither doctor knew it, so they locked their hands beneath the woman's armpits and hauled her out roughly, knowing that ribs could mend, dislocated joints could be fixed, but there was no coming back from lack of oxygen to the brain. "Here, check mine," Adam said, tossing his phone to Phil before bending to the woman. This was what he did. It was his job. And yet, in all the years since he'd qualified, this was the first time he'd attempted to resuscitate anyone outside of a hospital ward. Her ribcage lifted from the strength of his first rescue breaths, but failed to take over the task when he'd finished. There was an unfamiliar tremor to his hands as he locked them in position in the middle of the woman's chest and began compressions. As he breathed into her lungs and rhythmically forced her heart to circulate blood around her body, Phil tried their phones one more time. "I need to get back on the road to call for an ambulance," he said. Adam looked up from his patient, sweat dripping down his face from his exertions. How could he possibly have felt cold just a few minutes ago? Phil had turned towards the car when a lightning bolt memory shocked him into immobility. "That pub last night! Wasn't there an AED cabinet on the outside wall?" The moon slid out from behind a cloud, illuminating the look of hope on Adam's face. "There was, and it's only a couple of miles from here." It took 15 minutes for Phil to reach the pub, call 999, get the code to release the defibrillator from its cabinet, and drive back to the beach. The sight of his car's headlights splitting the darkened beach was one of the best things Adam had ever seen. His arms felt like they were on fire, and his own breathing was ragged, but his rhythm hadn't faltered, not for a second. He'd scarcely looked at the inert figure on the sand, whose life he was desperately trying to save. But he did so now, as Phil rapidly opened the defibrillator. The device was intended for hands far less skilled than theirs, and yet the men followed the machine's instructions as though they hadn't both done this more times than they cared to remember. Adam winced as Phil tore open the woman's nightgown to access bare skin, and saw the mottled marble hue of her torso. He kept up the compressions until the very last second, stopping only when Phil shouted out the command, "Clear!" When the AED informed them that a heartbeat had been found, Adam was...